Okay, I want to welcome you out tonight, and we're going to talk about writing life stories of your ancestors and others. I will not talk about writing yours because I don't want you to feel bad. All of us, including me, probably have at least the need to more completely write our life stories, if not do it entirely, because we've never gotten started. But we're not going to put a guilt trip on you tonight. We're just going to talk about other people writing life stories for others. Okay, so why do they have stories and memories? Well, the first thing is they hope that they can help us to turn those names that are in our pedigree into actual people that lived and breathed, and by having stories, you'll actually be able to connect with them. Stories, unfortunately, are a largely overlooked type of memory because they're hard. It takes some time to create a story. It's not like taking a picture of a picture and digitizing it and you're done and you put it up and you're finished. It takes some thought, it takes some action. And so surprisingly, very few people in Tree actually have stories attached to them. In this presentation, hopefully we can inspire you and give you the courage to try this. So if you're looking for stories in Tree, the easiest place to go looking is over to the fan charts and set the fan chart like I have on this one to stories, and it will show you the people on that fan chart, and it will color the people in based on how many stories they have. Basically, white is no stories at all. And you can see over half of the people in this view have no stories at all. And then there's a light tan, and then a light orange, and then the dark orange. The dark orange are people that have 10 or more stories. And so you'll find in most cases, this is pretty similar to what we have in everybody's tree. The thing that's most interesting to me is those generations closest to us. You can see the first two generations in the fan here have no stories. And these are all people that are dead, because I can look there, and even though it's hard to read them, I can see that they're all deceased people with no stories. See, that's the thing. There are many people very close to us in age, people that we knew personally, who don't have stories. Now, everybody has stories for their, third and fourth and fifth grade grandparents, especially if they were LDS. But these closer people, often there are no stories for them. And so there's a fertile field that should be fairly easy for us to help, populate with stories. Now, there's other ways to find stories. And one of the ways, besides the fan chart, is to go into a person's record and go into their memories and then filter the memories so that only stories are highlighted. And then you'll see that this person who has 26 memories has 5 stories. And that's one way to filter it down. There is a problem with that, though, and that is that in FamilySearch, there's often a need to create a story that you can't classify as a story. And we'll show you what I'm talking about in just a second. So there actually could be some other stories floating around that never get classified as a story for a reason. And why are these stories hidden? Well, it's because FamilySearch's Story Maker, the program that creates official stories, does not allow you to have footnotes in the story, and it does not allow you to have pictures embedded in the story so that they show up in the story where the picture would go. And so if you want to create something, a story that has footnotes or pictures embedded, you have to go a different route, which is to make your story then turn it into a PDF document. Well, then the problem is FamilySearch won't accept a PDF as a story. You have to put it in as a document. So you have documents that are actually stories. And sometimes you have stories that have been classified as documents because the writer didn't understand they needed to make them a story when they could have. Well, this is an example of some of those hidden stories. This is a story of my grandfather that I wrote that is in PDF form. And why is it in PDF form? Because I wanted the footnotes, and I had a bunch of pictures that I wanted scattered through the story so that they went with the story. So when it talks about his wedding, there's a wedding picture and so on. He also has a story that isn't a story. It's classified as a document. Or that's the document, excuse me. This other one is the actual story. It's the same story. The only thing is it doesn't have footnotes, and it has a strip of pictures at the top. They're not embedded in the story itself. We'll show you how you can do that. But those are actually the same story in memories, two different ways completely. And then another example of a story that's a little bit different is an audio story. Stories don't necessarily have to be typed. This is one that's actually an audio tape. It's about a minute long, and it's a story that my father told about when he was a little boy. And it involved his dad saving his life. And so it is appropriate to go under his father, like the other stories that are here. But it's also a story. Okay, stories come in many sizes. When you heard the title, you probably thought of this first one, the book. And this is why probably there are so few stories in FamilySearch. People think that means you have to write a book, a long narrative for a person. Well, you can if you want, and I have, but you don't have to. Stories don't have to come in all that size. They can be short little stories of just a few pages down to even just a single sheet of paper with whatever you know about the person. I have 3 very precious stories that my mother provided me the data for. And she passed away before Family Tree came along, so she couldn't very well put them in, where she wrote remembrances of her father and 2 of her grandparents. And they're just little blurbs, like my grandfather made ice cream every Sunday. And his mother washed with a certain type of soap. I can't remember now what it's called, but she had, washed with a certain soap, and she always smelled like it when my mother would see her as a little girl. And those little things don't sound real significant, but in some cases, you're the only person on earth that knows these details about your relative. And these stories are precious. Imagine how precious it'll be, even now, to be able to tell those stories, but even more so, say 20, 30 years from now. When people can look back and say, wow, there's my 5th great grandfather, and he liked to make ice cream every Sunday night to go with dinner. You might have to explain to them that there was no Baskin Robbins, no Cold Stone, no dryers in those days. So anyway, stories come in all different sizes. It doesn't mean we're talking about just great big long stories, though I will kind of focus in the latter part of this on writing principles for stories, and it will focus on big stories, but they really cover any story. Okay, FamilySearch has what I call a story machine. This is the template. This is the little machine, the little engine that creates the actual stories. And you can find it a couple of ways. One way is if you just go into a person's memories, you'll see that there's an Add Memories button at the top left of their memories. And when you click on it, the middle one is Story. and you can click on that and you'll get into their search engine, or not search engine, but their story creation engine. The other way is to go up at the top of your screen to Memories, to your gallery. Click on the green X, which now on this screen is a black background or a gray background with an X there because I've clicked on it. It's no longer green. This is where you would drop your pictures, but there's also the little Create Story button there. Either way that you go, when you click on it, you'll come to this. You'll come to a simple little program that doesn't look very significant. In fact, it looks kind of insignificant. You kind of wonder, there's not much room there for a story, but it does expand. And so there's some things you can do. One of them is you can set the story to be public or private. And I honestly don't see a need to say make it private unless you're going to be telling things in the story that you don't want people to know about. And if that's the case, why should we be putting it on FamilySearch at this point? But that's just my philosophy, my opinion. So make sure it says public. And then if you want that, some pictures to go with it, they won't go down in the story. They'll go above the story in a strip. And you can have up to 10 of them. And they will show in the order you put them. So if you want to put them chronologically, if you want them to be chronological, say from the person's birth to their death, then you need to put them in that order so they will show up that way. There is no way to move them around once they're in. If you don't like the order, you're going to have to delete them all and put them back in the order you want. And in most cases, rather than upload from scratch, I would just have them in my gallery already, but you can do it either way. Then there's a place for the title, and you can have up to 144 characters. And that includes the spaces. And then there's a place for the story, and that doesn't look very significant. But if you were actually typing, which I don't recommend, it will expand as you type. If you do think you're going to type the story, you will be given an hour. At the end of an hour, it will time out unsaved. Understand that. So if you're actually typing it from scratch, set a timer or something, and after 50 minutes or so, save what you have, go out, come back in, and start along where you left off, and you'll get another hour. So with that background, I would strongly recommend you don't write the story here unless it's just a very short little story, a paragraph or something, and do it in a word processor, whatever word processor you like. And then you'll be a lot better off. You can just copy and paste into here a story. And I mean, you can put long stories. I put in stories that are over 50 pages and never had a bit of trouble. I don't know if there's an actual limit. I've never noticed that, but it'll take a lot. It'll take a long story. But that's essentially where you create the story. Now, when you're finished, make sure that you, the one thing I skipped over is make sure you click save when you get done. Absolutely, because you don't want to lose it. Now, once the story is created, this is an example of one. You need to understand that as the creator, you're the only person that can edit the story. The story is yours strictly. Nobody can make changes to the story but the editor. And nobody can change the title but the editor. And nobody can remove any of the pictures that were there at the top. In this case, there's only one. Nobody can remove those or change those except the editor, the person that wrote this. Now, when you pull it up in Memories, you also have the sidebar where you or anybody can tag the people that are in the story. I would suggest you tag at least the major people. So this is a story of my grandmother. So it has her first and second husbands, and then my dad, her only child. And those are the people that I tagged in it. There are other people that are mentioned there. Right here on the front page, I can see her mother and father's names and an aunt. But you don't have to tag every single person. I also see her brothers and sisters being listed. You don't need to put everybody, but tag the major people. And then under the details, all those things there, fill in what you think is important. I haven't filled in any of these, unfortunately. And it's kind of hard. You have to kind of figure out, like event date. You're going to write the date the person was born or died, or the date you wrote the story. It's a little bit hazy on exactly what to put on there, or event place. Tags, you can add tags if you want. You can tag it like life story or something like that. But anyway, those can be done also. Those can be done by the author, as I recall. Okay. And then at the end of the story, there's a place for comments. It says a place for other people to leave comments. You could actually put a comment there if there's a need to, and I've done that, where I wanted to explain something for people. Okay, so that's essentially the story of how you put stories in FamilySearch. So let's talk about writing stories for the rest of this presentation. Understand that you're the author of your own life story, and that's very true. But there's a reality. Many of us are like the guy there that's on the boat with Washington on the Delaware, crossing the Delaware, and he says, I just don't have time to write my life story. That's the story of many of us. That's the reality for many of us. And what's that leave us? Well, that leaves us leaving a bunch of documents and pictures and scattered artifacts and leaving it for other people to write. And if you're writing life stories for others, this is what you're left with to create a story from. So writing a life story can seem to be very daunting, but it doesn't really have to be if you'll just take an organized approach to this. In fact, it can be a very rewarding activity. I absolutely love it because when I'm finished with a story, I feel a real bond with that person. I feel like I've walked the walk with them, and they're really my friend now. So, I mean, there's some real serious spiritual things that can happen from writing stories about your family members. Joseph Fielding Smith wrote this, I don't know, 80 years ago, maybe 90 years ago. And it couldn't be quite that long because it mentions computers. So it's going to be done about 1970 or so. It doesn't matter whether your computer is able to compile all the family group sheets for everyone that ever lived on the earth. It remains the responsibility of each individual to know his kindred dead. Even if they have been identified, it is still each person's responsibility to study and become acquainted with his ancestors. And that's the mantra that I go by as I go out and consider people that need to have their stories written. They're people that I want to become acquainted with for various reasons. They have a story that touches me, and I want to share that with others. Okay, so why write life stories? Remember, these people are just names on the tree. You want to bring them to life. You want to know who they really were. Everybody has a story to tell, even if they didn't write one. And there are lessons that we can learn about these people that need to be shared with their family. So as you write, you want to follow 3 themes in any story that you write. One of the themes is the person, their self. the birth and death, all the details about the person, how they fit into a family, and how history affected them. These are the three themes that you ought to weave into a good story. A lot of times stories don't make sense without understanding the family and the history that go with the person. Putting it in another view using Venn diagrams, what we're after is trying to create a story that focuses on this little area where person, family, and history all intersect. And as we weave a story and it has all three themes in it, the story becomes a rich, vibrant story. Okay, it takes pre-planning. Actually, I've learned that the planning sometimes takes longer than the writing. It's probably the most important step of all. You're kind of like a cook, assembling the ingredients, the utensils, and the recipe before you begin to cook. And always remember, if you don't know where you're going, you'll never know if you get there or not, and you most likely won't. Okay, the person information. Collect everything you can about the person. I'm currently writing my second great-grandfather's life story. He's had several stories written about him. Why do I want to add another one? Because it's been over 50 years since the last one was written, and there's now a lot of documentation that's available that wasn't there before. And it's interesting, as I've read over carefully all these other stories, and I'd say there's 5 to 7 other life stories of his. None of them agree entirely, and almost every one of them has some fact in it that none of the others have. And so what I want to do is bring all these things together in a single story. But you need to collect what you do know, and then research the person as fully as you can, looking for facts. Also looking for third-party records, local histories, newspapers, diaries of others that may have mentioned your ancestor, things like that. And what I do is I create an outline. This is a part of an outline for my second great-grandfather, whose life I'm writing right now. And you notice I do it by year in this case, because we know so much. I can put down something practically for every year. And so this gives me something to write from. I check these things off as I go to them, but I'm also still looking for more things to fill in the gaps, because believe me, I have more than what's written here. These were just some main facts that I gathered at the beginning, and then I've found more things. But I create an outline to work from. Okay, then you have family information. Of course, a lot of times you can't really write everything about the family because you want to tell this person's story, but you want to have them fit into the family. Where were they when he was 10 years old? What would his life have been like in this family at that age? Did he have older brothers or younger brothers or what? Or sisters? Okay, and then history. And especially if you're telling the story of LDS people, you have to include some history, because our story makes no sense without the connection to history. It makes no sense that my my great uncle went off to die on the Mormon battalion without knowing a little history about why the Mormon battalion was formed, and why they left when they did, what was going on. And so you really want to put a history context in there. And one person was asked about what happens when you die and people can't make changes to your story. Well, there's something they can always do. They can copy your story. They can edit it. They can repost it as theirs. Or they could repost it as theirs, having copied it from you so that you still get some credit. But that would be essentially what would happen if you pass away and somebody feels a need to edit one of your stories. The easiest thing to do is you can download them. Anything that's a memory in FamilySearch can be downloaded. Then you can edit it, repost it. Kind of hard to do it if it's PDF. You got to convert it over to Word or something. But okay, so back to our topic here of history. How did history affect their life? How did it affect their living conditions? You know, they were living in a certain time period. How were their living conditions affected? My second great-grandfather was alive in the year 1816. What's the big deal about that? Well, besides the War of 1812 ending just recently, that was the year when I think it was Krakatoa erupted, and they had the summer, or the year without summer, and many people died of starvation, froze. He lived through that, and so that's something that you'd want to bring up in the story. He lost a sibling from it. About the social conditions. You can't tell a story of people that were early members of the church without talking about what happened with the mobs and the reasons behind it, and different situations that developed as the people traveled across our country and went from one mob situation to another, had their homes burned, things like that. And political conditions, the same thing goes there. So you don't have to fill your story up with a lot of history, but you need to provide enough history that people feel how history does help shape what happens to people. Okay, so now it's time to get to the story. But we need the planning, plot the following: the traditions, the known facts, the family data, historical context. In traditions, beware. There's a lot of times traditions and stories or in family history that aren't really necessarily true, and you need to decide ahead of time what you're going to do about them. When somebody says this person did this or that and they really didn't, are you going to bring it up? Are you going to contradict it in your story, or are you just going to ignore it? Or how are you going to deal with this? In the family history, decide ahead of time which family events need to be brought up, and plan to include the historical perspectives that make sense and are helpful to the story. So guess what? Now you can actually write. Consider while you're writing possibly the style. You need to write in third person. That's where you always refer to this person as he or her, or by name, William or Sarah, or like that. You never use I or us or we. You stay in third person and try to keep the same person all the way through the story. What I do when I write the story is I put the sources in the story itself in brackets. I just put my sources that are going to become footnotes just in brackets so I can see them. Try to focus on the facts, address the traditions if needed, and work in the historical ideas. Include the family story, the births and deaths. Include explanations if needed or non-factual data. Consider sensitive issues. What are you going to do? I have my second great grandfather, a wife who died under suspicious conditions in Iowa the week before the Mormons left for Utah. And so I had to be careful how I worded what I put in there about her death, because nobody knows for sure how she died. But there are some pretty strong feelings. Okay, and then possibly consider closing with a summary, a conclusion, or a lesson learned from the person's life. You can put a narrative at the end from you, saying, here's the reason I wrote, or this is what I learned from writing. Okay, the mechanics of writing. I no longer write stories in longhand. No sense of doing that. Use a word processor. Anything. I use Microsoft. You can use any word processor is good. Anything that does spell check and grammar check, at least for this writer. I'm one that needs it. And that allows for the ease of editing. I love having a word processor. Sure beats the old days. Okay, after you've made your rough draft, I like it to sit. It's kind of like wine. So we don't drink wine. I know that, but they create the apple juice or the fruit juice, and then they let it sit and ferment. Well, I do the same thing with my writing. After I finish the rough draft, I let it sit for a while. I need to get away from it, space myself away, so that when I come back, I can look at it with a clear mind and not be so wrapped up with it as mine and having just written all that. I've had some time for it to settle. Then I can try to read it again as an outsider and asking questions like, is this telling the story that the author once told? Is it complete? Have I left anything out? And at that point, I can start extracting those sources that I put in brackets and turning them actually into footnotes or endnotes, whichever way I want to do the story. And I can insert headings, kind of like making chapter breaks in the story. And you proofread, and you proofread, and you still don't find everything. You never do. And that's when you turn to others. And I turn it to my wife and I say, dear, will you read this now and be kind to me? Because she will tear it apart. She'll find all the mistakes and all the things that aren't clear, and that's what I want. That's what I need. Let some new eyes see what you've written, and they may pick up with things that you miss. Then at the very end, one of the last things you do when you're doing a word processor, at least I do, is that's when I finally do put the illustrations in. All along I've known I need a picture of this and a picture of that and a picture of this, but I wait till the very end because they tend to mess up this sequence of how stuff is spaced in the story. And I try to put them in starting at the top of the story and working down in sequence through the story, so that as it takes up more space, it just pushes things further down, and there's no pictures down there to mess up the spacing that I've created for them down below the picture I'm putting in now. So I put it in last, and I start at the top and work down through the story. And then publishing, of course, we're going to publish in FamilySearch. But if you wanted to do something else on your own, you could consider, sharing with your family only, or gifts to libraries or other institutions, putting them online, or you could even do a book format. I'm thinking of taking the stories I've written that are actual biographies of people and putting them together in a bound book for my kids one of these days. And it'll probably be 250 pages or so. But I'll give them a copy of all the stories I've written in hard copy. Okay, That's how you write stories. I hope this has helped. I hope this hasn't scared you away. It's really a fun activity. And I strongly recommend that all of us give it a shot and start with something simple.